my friends. Welcome to the Healthy Peaceful Podcast. Thank you for joining me this week as I embark on a series of 10 episodes where I will explore. Here I'm lifting from a phrase from Robert Sachs's book titled Perfect Endings, the most critical life-bristling moment which we can prepare to face in a raw and honest way, death and dying. Also from his book, death is a truth we cannot escape, and yet, why do so many of us, especially in the West, try to escape it or push it away? Sachs says, the glib statement that death is a part of life sounds too philosophical and smug, especially to those who have witnessed dying and death in an intimate way. I could not agree more. As you may suspect, this series is personal for me. At this moment, I am confronted with my father and aunt, my mother's sister, in the same nursing home. I have felt it all, and there's probably more to come. Anger, dismay, sadness, anticipatory grief, confusion, deep pain, deep compassion, exhaustion, love, indifference, wanting to escape. The only thing I know is that I am not alone. There are other family members and loved ones in this mix, as well as you, my global family. Instead of escaping my reality and pushing it away, this experience is an opportunity for me to awaken to the stream of my own life, to explore what it means to stand witness to another's final chapter, to consider the meaning of the elder's position at the center of the family mandala as his earthly life approaches its close, to be willing to support the elder and other family members without judgment, to engage with the inevitable pitfalls, and finally to learn to be kinder toward myself and others. Join me as I interview guests who I am hoping will encourage us to open to this experience and be willing to let go of our fears and expectations. As Robert Sachs says, to open to the timeless essence of the elder's soul and ultimately to our own. Hello, my friends. This afternoon, I have the fabulous opportunity to interview Marilyn Schlitz, PhD. And here I'm going to just briefly read a bio of Marilyn. Marilyn is a social anthropologist, a researcher, writer, and a charismatic public speaker. She is the program chair in the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology at Sofia University. She has previously taught and/or conducted research at Stanford, Harvard, and Trinity Universities. Marilyn serves as President Emeritus and Senior Fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, located in California, an organization she has led for over 25 years. For more than 3 decades, Marilyn has been a leader in the field of consciousness studies. Her research and her extensive publications focus on personal and social transformation, cultural pluralism, extended human capacities, and mind-body medicine. She has a depth of leadership experience in government, business, and nonprofit sectors. Her broad and varied work has given her a unique ability to help individuals and organizations identify and develop the personal and interpersonal skills and capacities needed by 21st century leaders. Her books include Consciousness and Healing, an Integral Approach to Mind-Body Medicine, Living Deeply, the Art and Science of Transformation in Everyday Life, and Death Makes Life Possible. She's also produced a film with Dr. Deepak Chopra with the same title. Marilyn has published hundreds of articles, including results of scientific studies in scholarly journals, and in more popular publications. She has lectured extensively around the world, including before the UN and the Smithsonian Institute. Welcome, Marilyn, to the Healthy Peaceful Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Wow. Wow, that's I can only describe your career when I read that bio as a transpersonal journey.
Indeed.
I know you have a long and varied career in a variety of fields, but really in the transpersonal realm. Do you want to comment, on the trajectory of your career in any way?
It's been a wonderful ride, and it continues to unfold in unpredictable ways, and that's exciting. So I really enjoy all the various facets of what I'm involved in. And I'm no longer the chair at Sofia University. I am a professor there and enjoy teaching immensely. And I am involved in different kinds of research projects. So I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about that.
Awesome, awesome. When you and I spoke, I indicated that I wanted to focus on your book and your film, Death Makes Life Possible. But I asked you at the time a question that I asked many guests, and that is, what are you giving your attention to now?
Well, my students, and they are a remarkable cohort of people who have opted out of a kind of traditional mainstream approach and are interested in exploring these, sort of untapped human potentials. I am involved in a research project called the psychomantium, which is a sensory deprivation procedure that invites creative imagination. And we ask people to conjure that creative imagination in a way that allows them to communicate with departed loved ones, invisible others in various ways. And I am right now just completing that first project, and we'll be launching a second study soon. And I'm also writing a novel. So I do stay busy, and it's been a great way of dealing with all this pandemic and enjoying my life here in Southern California.
Great. Yeah, I want to explore that more deeply. The psychomantium, for those who have delved into parapsychology and moving beyond consciousness and consciousness studies, that may be a term that's familiar. But for many, that won't be a familiar term. So first, could you elaborate a little bit on what that is? So let's start there. What is a psychomantium? And how, I believe you also indicated that the studies that you're currently conducting, you're using it in a virtual reality and as a way to move through grief, as well as other areas.
Yeah, so throughout history and in most cultures, people have developed tools and technologies for divination or communicating with invisible realms. And
Right.
so, the ancient Greeks did scrying, or they had the Delphi oracles, for example,
Sure.
who were asked by people from various walks of life, including leaders, to anticipate what would happen in the future. And they would gaze into these reflective pools in order to gain insights. So one of the things that happens is that people begin to have imagery, and they can have that imagery in various modalities. It can be visual, it can be auditory, they can feel it in their bodies. And so Raymond Moody is a psychiatrist, and he was working with some of his clients, and they were attempting to move through grief and loss of departed loved ones. And he came up with this idea that perhaps he could adapt this ancient technology and bring it into a clinical setting. So he created this little chamber called the psychomantium, where it's basically completely dark, and you have this briefly or barely illuminated mirror, and people are in this dark room and they gaze into this illuminated mirror, and instead of seeing themselves, they see nothing other than a little bit of this candle. And with a short period of time and with the proper intention, people begin to experience things. And some people, not all people, but some people. And he found that it was very beneficial from a therapeutic point of view. And so then some scientists began to look at whether this tool, this procedure, the psychomantium, could be used for research. And so they began to look at recruiting people and engaging in the psychomantium experience in order to alleviate grief, and actually measuring changes in grief as a result of their experiences. So I started looking at this as a way of studying different kinds of sensory modalities as it relates to experiences of invisible others. So, whether it's ghosts or spirits or, just the imagination. Not just, the imagination is a powerful place to be. And I began to adapt this process to technology, and in particular, virtual reality. So the study I'm just finishing right now compared the psychomantium in a physical chamber with the mirror, and then a virtual reality application where people are gazing into a reflective pool of water. And we looked at then holding constant people's ability to become immersed in the experience, or what's called absorption. So how much could they become absorbed in the task? And would that correlate with their grief outcomes? And we found, in fact, that for people who are skilled in absorption, they have a stronger response to the psychomantium experience. And not everybody has this capacity to be absorbed. It tends to be associated with high creatives, or people who have very active imaginations, people who are able to lose themselves into, what's called the flow state, or, other kinds of experiences where people kind of lose track of time, they lose track of their physical environment. And so what we're finding is that people who are high in absorption tend to also then show the benefits of the psychomantium experience. And in this study in particular, we were measuring grief. So we're just finishing that one up. And then the next study I'm doing is on talent and training. This research has been sponsored by the Be All Foundation, which is an organization out of Portugal that has been very generous in helping to support innovative research that, expands our understanding of human consciousness, and, some of these various procedures that invite advancements in our human potentials.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, wow, that's awesome. So this is, did you find any difference between, are you going to be publishing the results of your study as it pertains to the psychomantium and grief specifically?
Definitely. We will definitely be publishing that. I'm writing it up right now. We just did the statistics on it. And I hope to publish it in a psychology journal. We've also given a couple of presentations. And as I started to say, the next study will be looking at what we're calling talent and training. So the talent is the ability to move into absorption, and the training is repeated testing using the virtual reality. So the experience many people report is that they want to do it more than once. So like any kind of practice, any kind of transformative experience, it helps to do it repeatedly. And so what we're going to do is really look at whether these experiences can be enhanced through repetition, and also then to compare people who are high absorption and low absorption.
Now, talent and training. So the talent is essentially how is it the rapidity of moving into the absorption state or the ability to move into the absorption state?
It's a trait. And so some people are better at it than others. And
Right.
in this experiment, the next one, we're going to actually be looking at recruiting people who are both high and low in this trait and looking to see if there's a difference. In the current experiment, we just sampled people and measured absorption. In this next experiment, we're going to actually recruit people specifically for these capacities.
Okay, all right. And even if somebody is, let's say, in the category of low absorption, is the training intended to, with repetition, do they increase the capacity to move into, to be more of a high absorption, to move into the flow?
Well, we'll see. That's the hypothesis, really.
Okay, all right. So it's really twofold. It's the absorption, and that's coming into the experience. And the second is the practice, which happens with repeated, like any practice, it would be just I'm assuming that obviously it's a scientific study, so you don't know quite what the results are going to be, and I'll qualify, but I am not a scientist, attorney by trade. But the practice is going to shift them in the significance of the practice. Do you want to comment on that? Like the repetition, the training?
Well, it remains to be seen what will happen, but the hypothesis is that as people engage in this virtual reality experience, that it increases their comfort and they have a greater capacity to anticipate what the experience will be like. And so they can be more comfortable with the experience. And what we're finding is that, it's not for everyone. Like some people do really well, and some people, after the session is over, they just say, well, that was okay. Whereas other people are like, wow, they have full-blown dynamic experiences. So I'm just having a little distraction here for a second.
Oh, okay, no problem. Some lights flickering?
No, it's some water running, actually.
Oh, okay. Do you want to stop for a moment, or?
I'm okay.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So anyway, we're just really looking to see, like any transformative practice, does repetition increase people's comfort? Does it increase their likelihood that they'll be able to have these experiences? And then to be able to look at whether it really is about the trait of absorption or whether it is about the repetition and the familiarity in the experience. So this is what we'll be looking at in the next study, and we're looking for people. So if anybody is listening to this and is interested, I will encourage people to contact me.
That's great. Would they contact you by email, Marilyn?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Do you want to give your email address, so just so they have it right now?
Marilyn at marilynschlitz.com.
Great, awesome. Yeah, it sounds really exciting, and it's interesting that you're using this particular modality, this method, this psychomantium, but you're using it in a variety of ways, starting with grief and then working into talent and training. And I'm sure there are other, depending on how the studies go, you have other things in mind as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, looking at ways in which we can expand our imaginations, can we use this for, incubating ideas? Can we use it for thinking about applying it in the context of entrepreneurship, for example, and business, for people who are artists and wanting to expand their own creative potentials? Can it be used in mind-body healing? For example, if you set the intention to heal and you bring about this absorption and the idea of what happens in the virtual reality experience, where you really are, fully immersed in it, do these help people in the healing process? So those are all questions that we have, and that in time will begin to roll out through this process.
That's cool. Do you have students working with you on this project?
I do. I have a number of students, and we have done various tasks. And right now, like I said, we're just finishing this first study, and it's been a long haul because with the pandemic, it made it very difficult for us to obviously put people in little chambers. And so that was actually when we pivoted to the virtual reality experience. And so the next phase of this will be allowing people to work from the comfort of their homes, so that they don't have to actually come to our lab, as long as they have the virtual reality headset.
Awesome. Awesome. Wow, that's great. All right. I'm just curious, when we spoke, you indicated that this was going to be helpful in allowing people to move through grief and essentially to complete unfinished business with a loved one. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Well, for many people, they lose someone that they care deeply about, and they've never been able to have that final conversation. I'm a little hesitant to use the word conversation because that implies a certain kind of sensory modality, but
Sure.
they want to complete the relationship.
Maybe just saying there's a sense of unfinished business.
Correct. And so using the psychomantium as a tool for completing that unfinished business can be very therapeutic.
Okay, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. And we talked about the psychomantium, that you can use this modality for purposes other than moving through grief, such as what you've spoken about. I'm wondering if the psychomantium helps people manage difficult emotions. Does it increase their ability to relate to suffering instead of pushing it away?
Again, that's a testable hypothesis, but I would suggest that if approached with intention, and if that is the intention that people are bringing to the task, then I would expect the answer is yes, that, it can help them to process their experiences. They can invite, the spirits or the personalities or the even in the depths of their own creative imagination, it can allow them to access these non-ordinary capacities. And so that's what we're really looking at, how intention and then attention. So the psychomantium provides a way of opening our attention to really, more unconscious processes that happen within us.
Okay, that's great. I know in an interview that I listened to, you spoke of recently losing a very dear friend, where obviously you experienced grief. But in that interview, you were able to reframe that. And I think that's a word that I would use to describe many things in your career, as a reframing, or encouraging students to reframe. You reframed the experience as one of gratitude. Could you comment on that?
Well, gratitude and grateful living is, my practice. And so I try to invite in this feeling of gratitude in most aspects of my life. And it's easy to feel gratitude when everything's going well and you're happy and floating around.
Sure. Oh yeah, yeah.
A little more challenging when life is stressful or when there is suffering. And so how do we stay present in the midst of suffering? And I think that's a really fundamental question that many of us experience discomfort or pain or suffering in various aspects of our life. And so how do we begin to think about the opportunity that comes in these moments? So you mentioned the time when a very dear friend of mine had a terminal illness, and she lived, this is when I was living in Northern California, and she lived in San Francisco, and I lived in north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And so I was visiting with her on a fairly routine basis. And if you've ever been to the Golden Gate Bridge and had the opportunity to experience it, it is really palpable that it's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary place. And
absolutely.
a testament to human ingenuity. And on one side, you have the rawness of nature and the Pacific Ocean. And then on the other side, you have sort of the pinnacle of human architecture and development. And so I would frequently use the bridge as a place to express gratitude. And I would try to do my gratefulness practice as I was crossing over the bridge. And at this point in my history, she was very sick. And so it was still my practice to express gratitude and to invite in gratitude when I was crossing the bridge. But, at this point, it was really painful to know what was going on for her and the loss of this person who was so important to me. And so I began to reframe, as you stated it, and instead of feeling the loss, it was more about inviting in the opportunity. And so recognizing that it's a gift to love someone so much that you feel the pain of
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I really love that, actually. Just that that it is a gift that you've been granted that opportunity so that you can feel that deeply.
Yeah, and then to know that one has the capacity to have that depth of experience, and that those emotions are something that we are capable of. And then to know that I had that kind of friendship that I could care that deeply about, these were all gifts. And so to be able to hold it as such, even in the face of loss and in the face of grief, was for me an important practice and an important opportunity to understand a little better what my own capacities are.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. You also mentioned a book by Tanya Luhrmann. Her book is How God Becomes Real, where she explores the combination of habits, practices, relationships, sensations, and stories that enable humans to experience God as real. She delves into the differences across faiths and cultures while also offering a bold, persuasive case for all we share in common. you want to comment on that as it relates to loss, grief, accompanying loved ones through the dying process, or related topics?
Well, her work deals with how people encounter these invisible others. And she had grown up in an evangelical family, and she, observed that people were having conversations with God. And so you could go and have coffee with God, and you could have this kind of direct encounter. And as she grew up and she began to expand her own horizons, she's an anthropologist by training, she began to see that different cultures encounter these invisible others in different ways, involving different kinds of modalities. So some people feel the presence of whatever you want to call it, whether they're ghosts or angels or whatever those invisible others are. So in the case of pagans, for example, it might be the conjuring of spirits in nature. And so maybe they see things instead of hearing voices. Or perhaps there are places where people have more of, even taste or smells. So people in different cultures manifest their relationships with these invisible others in different ways. And so I think that that's an extraordinary observation, and it helps to understand how people experience something like God in different ways. And so there isn't just one right way for people to have these kind of supernatural encounters, and that it can be about training. So if somebody works at it, if they are involved in some kind of discipline, whether it's religion or it's some kind of immersion in nature, or it is some experience of, gardening, whatever it happens to be, if it involves some kind of repetitive action accompanied by intention, people can begin to experience things that are outside of our conventional sensory awareness. And so that's what she was exploring in her work, and it is, in terms of the psychomantium, what I've been exploring. And so when, I'd been doing this research, and when I discovered her work, it was like, an amazing opportunity to find a kindred spirit, spirit in the sense of
Yeah,
similar
gotcha.
training to what I have. And to, feel that kind of collegiality, and to be able to share a little bit about what our observations have been and what our methods are to explore these, extended human capacities.
Mm. Yeah, and I think what I hear you're saying as well, that this you don't have to be anyone with an open mind and intention and attention, that and training, the discipline and repetition, that there is accessibility, there's a possibility of accessibility in terms of exploring these capacities.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, great. I know you have an audio series on grief. Do you want to touch upon that?
Well, I did an extensive amount of research with my colleagues at the Institute of Noetic Sciences around transformation, and how do people experience change? How do they have these fundamental shifts in their understanding of who they are and their place in reality?
Sure.
And so we interviewed people from different faith traditions, different cultural backgrounds, different ages. And what we, discovered is that there were these various approaches to transformation, but that the transformative process can take many forms, and that it isn't just one kind of practice. It isn't just one modality, that it can manifest in various ways. And so that was what led us to the book, Living Deeply. And it helped us to understand that, there are these skills that we can cultivate in order to bring about positive, life-affirming changes in our lives. And what became clear to me is that the fundamental transformation, that of death and our death awareness, wasn't something we really dealt with in that book. We, touched on it in our interviews, but we, obviously didn't have the time or the space to deal with everything. And so later, I began to really explore how different cultures understand the nature of death and understand, what this kind of worldview or cosmology is about what happens after death. And by positing our own mortality, does that help us to live better? Can we, alleviate some of the suffering that comes from our fear around death by really embracing it and exploring it and living into it? And so I had the opportunity to create a documentary film with Deepak Chopra, where we really did a deep dive on this experience of death from different cultural settings, also looking at a scientific lens around what is the evidence for consciousness surviving bodily death. And how does engaging in these kinds of questions really help people to address their own fears, their own relationships to those around them, and also to those that they've lost. So that led to a companion book by the same title. It's a very different approach, the documentary film, from what we did with the book. The book is much more about the transformative model. And so when I was doing the work on worldview transformation, we created a model that allowed us to understand what were the qualities and characteristics that these different traditions had in common. And so I applied that model to this idea of death awareness and different cosmologies around death and what happens after. So in doing the book and making the film, we had huge amounts of resources and really deep interviews with people from these different walks of life. And it felt like there was more to be done. And so I began to create educational programs around the death experience and around these different cosmologies, and then created a podcast series where we repurposed a lot of those interviews in ways that people could listen and engage in the materials from the comfort of their own homes, and maybe use these podcasts, maybe use the film, maybe use the book, maybe use these educational materials as tools for engaging these conversations with others. So we took the film all over the world, probably had a couple million views in various settings. And what I discovered is just how pervasive this fear and death denial is across different cultures. And it's not everyone that has that, but many people have this kind of anxiety around their own mortality. And so how can we help people to understand better that, death is a birthright, and that it is something that each of us will have the opportunity to face, and that people hold what happens next in different ways depending on, their worldview and their own metaphysical understandings. So, for an atheist, it may be when you're dead, you're done. That's it. Whereas somebody who comes from a different kind of religious background has a different type of cosmology about what will happen after death. Some, there's this idea of heaven and hell. Others, it's reincarnation. It can be something that involves, spirit world. And so our ability to connect with the spirits, there's just all kinds of different ways in which people approach this topic. And so that's what I have explored through Death Makes Life Possible, through the film, through the books, through the podcast, through the educational programs, all of that. And these
It's really much needed work. And do you have a title for your podcast if listeners or viewers would like to check out that series?
It's Death Makes Life Possible.
Okay.
On my website,
On your website, okay.
MarilynSchlitz.com, there are so many resources there for people.
Okay.
And the
Okay.
podcasts are free and they're available for people. And
Okay.
likewise, we really encourage people to use the film in community settings. For example, we have a facilitator guide that's available. So if people wanted to show the film and then engage in meaningful conversation.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the kind of film that would be really helpful in starting dialogue.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
what it's really about. It's really helping to facilitate these kind of conversations that can be transformative.
Sure. I know in both of your books, The Living Deeply and Death Makes Life Possible, and you referred to this term in your conversation, in your what you were just mentioning, but you use the term worldview. I guess I just want to get a sense for what that means to you, and how it's significant to your work currently, or how it's significant in the way that you view the world, either professionally or personally.
I think it's the most fundamental and impactful aspect of perception. So we all have a worldview, and it's these glasses that we wear, and it's this lens of perception through which we see the world, through which we understand the world. We understand how we fit in the world. And that worldview looks different for different people. And one of the things that we see today in our, modern world is the kind of polarities that are emerging. They've always been there, but I think they've been amplified by social media and by, the convergence of different cultures, different orientations, whether it's political or religious, educational. So understanding that we have a worldview and that informs everything allows us to have a bit more cognitive flexibility. So we don't have to be so rigid about what we hold to be true. And it can allow us to begin to invite in our creativity and our curiosity. And we can begin to do sort of position taking. So instead of just being reactive when somebody's point of view is fundamentally different from our own, we can begin to think about, I wonder what that looks like, or how that informs the way in which they live their lives. So having this notion that, first of all, we have a worldview, that everyone has a worldview, that this worldview can take different form. And also, one of the things I'm really fascinated with is these cognitive biases and the ways in which we become very connected to a particular lens of perception. And oftentimes we're unable to see things beyond what we expect to see. So there are these, inattentional blindnesses, for example, where if we believe the world is a certain way, that, all widgets are round, then we're only going to see round widgets. Whereas if we begin to think, well, maybe there's square widgets, or maybe there's rectangular widgets,
Sure.
there's curvy widgets, we might begin to see those things in ways that we wouldn't see if our cognitive biases limit our capacity to see. And we see this, in terms of different cultures. We grow up in a culture, and it indoctrinates us in a worldview. And throughout our lives, as we grow and we age, we begin to transform. And so we have the capacity to change our perceptions, but oftentimes people really are stuck. And so how can we, become unstuck? And I think a really important part of that is recognizing, what I call worldview literacy, that we can learn about our worldviews. And it's like any other, capacity, whether it's reading, writing, arithmetic, worldview competence is something that frees us and allows us to expand the realms of possibility.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Yeah, I did a podcast a while ago, interview of there's similarities because it had to do with intercultural communication, and the nuances of that. And so yeah, and I was you actually kind of answered my next question in terms of that, because I was going to ask, we have these worldviews, and there is an element of conditioning and indoctrination, and it's challenging to loosen that, because that's the paradigm. We grew up in a paradigm. We were conditioned, and so how do we loosen that? But you really responded to what I was thinking about, was we start to educate ourselves on different views, and perhaps we're willing to question our own view. It's sort of like it almost brings me to the work of Byron Katie. Is it true? So it's a lot of inquiry and questioning, and curiosity and willingness and openness. So just beginning to cultivate that, I think, is really important. I know in your book you talk about death terror. You have and even that term, that phrase is somewhat terrifying, death terror. But it's true. People are there's either low level anxiety or high level anxiety about dying and death, especially in the US, I would say. But you also describe death as a transformative experience. So maybe you can touch upon both of those.
Well, I don't think it's just in the US that people have this anxiety, death anxiety.
Okay, because you said you travel the world with a film, and so you had an opportunity to engage cross-culturally on these topics.
I think sometimes, indigenous worldviews are more accommodating of the cycles of life than, what we experience now in terms of modernity. But I think that, we just have this amplification of anxiety and fear. And I think a lot of what's happening in terms of the politics is people are, emphasizing the need for fear, and have solutions that are maybe quick fixes for those anxieties. And I think probably, this death anxiety thing is core. It's probably fundamental for many people, and it takes some kinds of efforts to overcome it. And we know that when people have these anxieties, and if they are not brought into our conscious awareness, it can lead to pathologies. So people can become very aggressive or violent. They can, cause harm to others. And that is really, in many ways, a reaction to these kinds of unconscious beliefs or fears. And, not even so much beliefs as, something that is kind of hardwired into that kind of amygdala brain. So we are fighting and, or fleeing because we just don't know how to engage it. So one of the things I think it's really powerful in transformation is curiosity. And how can we invite in, ways that we question those assumptions that we're making. And so, people do puzzles, or, they engage in perspective taking, travel, cross-cultural juxtaposition. It's a wonderful term that anthropologists use, where, when you go somewhere and you experience a culture that's very different from your own, it forces you to see things in a new light. And that can be very, very healthy. If people are open to it. And again, going back to what I said about the psychomantium, that people can resist change. How many people go to another place and they want everything exactly the way they're used to it being.
Oh yeah, exactly.
They want exactly what they're used to getting in their hometown. Well, that's not really inviting.
They want to travel, but they want to be quote unquote comfortable, and comfortable means they don't want things disrupted too much.
That's right. So it takes, a certain openness, and again, this cognitive flexibility to open ourselves and engage in viewpoints that are different. And that includes this idea of, understanding different cosmologies around death, and understanding that it's inevitable. And so, making peace with that. And even if it's, engaging in some of the Sufi practices, for example, they go to cemeteries and they lay down next to the graves. Or in some of the traditions, like in Catholicism, they will actually lay down in a coffin. And there'll be this practice of people walking around them and talking about what was this person like, and so it opens them to a different frame of reference.
Sure. Well, it reminds me of, fear. And when you move closer to the fear, you create some space, and, instead of just pushing it away, you kind of make friends with it.
Exactly.
So I think there's something transformative there. I know we're at the top of the hour. I want to check in with you. I'm happy to have a few more questions, but I'm happy to go longer, but I want to be respectful of your time. How do you feel?
We can do a few more minutes. That'll be fine.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, and we've touched on this somewhat, but in our culture, death is something that happens to someone else. It is taboo, and we've talked about this in terms of ways of unraveling this, you know. But I also want to touch on early in your career, you made unconventional choices, and you said it was because you wanted to be on the edge of a paradigm shift. What did you consider a paradigm shift then and now? So perhaps in your youth, you wanted to, you made choices, professional choices that you chose the unconventional route because you wanted to be close to a paradigm shift. What did that mean to you at that time? And at this point, a juncture of your life, what does it mean to you now? And I'm probably more interested in what it means now.
I'm not sure it means a whole lot different.
Okay,
In the sense that I grew up in Detroit, and
sure.
that's, the Motor City. It's
Yep,
the pinnacle of a mechanistic worldview.
sure.
And so we want materialism. We are kind of wedded to that idea that, if we have a nice car, that we're going to be happier. And
Car is an appropriate choice of material object in Detroit.
it
Yep.
definitely is.
Mhm.
And I know that I felt that there was something more, and I wasn't sure what that was, but I felt like there was a way in which being shackled to that materialist model limited our capacity to have joy and to work toward a more positive worldview, something that was more respectful, that was more loving and more gentle. And so I, began to look at the expanded reaches of human consciousness. Was this idea of worldview something that we were just stuck with? Was materialism all there was? Or could we begin to craft a new model? And I felt that studying consciousness was a way to explore unexplored territory, and to begin to grapple with alternative realms of possibility. And I think, I still feel that way. Maybe my perspective has become more expansive as I've increased my own education. It's allowed me to question some things, to learn new concepts and to begin to share those with others. I think that that's probably, the difference now is that, I was really interested in using science as a way of shifting the paradigm and exploring the tools of science in order to understand the ineffable. So how could we use, the rigor and discernment that comes from science, but recognizing that there may be qualities of human experience that science can grapple with. And maybe that means that we need to also expand the science. And so that was really, kind of my obsession. And in many ways it still is, but I've come to broaden my idea of ways of knowing. And so I think that there are, spiritual ways of knowing, there are relational ways of knowing. I think deep listening is a way of knowing. And so I think I've become more rounded, in many ways, I suppose, but certainly in terms of my worldview, I have explored and traveled, to many places in the world, not every place, obviously, but many places. And that has given me an opportunity to make friends and in that friend-making process to encounter people whose worldviews are different from my own, whether it's in the midst of the Ecuadorian Amazon or in, the mountains of Asia. I've had these experiences. And so that has allowed me a bit more capacity building. But it's still the same. I'm still really interested in how we can make the world a better place, how I can be a better person, how I can cultivate, in others, this kind of curiosity so that they too can begin to question their assumptions. Yeah, I've always been interested in talking to people who have differences. I remember as a kid, I was, early on, I was really interested in looking at people who held different religious beliefs, or people who held different political views, and trying to be kind of a shapeshifter between those. And I think that's still a quality that I embrace and seek to cultivate even more.
Wonderful. I love that. I love that term, shapeshifter. And I love the fact that you continue to evolve, and that you're even willing to expand how you view science, or the notion of science and scientism, and how and how we look at reality and view reality and measure reality. So, okay. Yeah. Oh, at one point in your career, you studied power dynamics in the healthcare paradigm. I believe it was in the West Indies. And do you see any parallels to what you studied then to our current healthcare paradigm in the US?
Oh, power is everywhere. It is pervasive in all walks of life. Going back to the death anxiety, it's our attempt to have power over, the natural process. And we hold with great rigidity to various things. So healthcare is a way of us attempting to control, the physical. And there are clearly economic and political aspects of the healthcare system. I think that power is a very interesting idea. So there's power over. So we're attempting to dominate. There's power under, where we become sort of the victims. And again, in a worldview where we're victimized, we don't feel that sense of, our own locus of control. And then there's power with. And I think that power with allows us to begin to move in ways that can help us to see transformation, not only within ourselves, but within our families, our communities, our institutions. So can we begin to think about healthcare as an institution that can be empowering of people? Can we work with our own mind body in ways that allow us to heal ourselves, that we can begin to see the spiritual aspects as a tool of healing? Can we recognize that we are embedded in an ecosystem, and that is an important part of how we maintain our health and well-being? So, in all of those places and in all of those ways, I think that, again, worldview becomes fundamental to understanding who we are, how we engage our own mind, body, spirit, and how we can empower others to expand their own understanding of their own health and well-being.
Right. That's wonderful. Okay. In your film, Death Make Life Possible, I just have a couple more questions. Deepak Chopra states in the film, death is a journey. And he also says, dying and rebirth keeps life fresh. This is how we evolve. Any comments regarding Deepak's statements?
Well, he's a very wise man, and that's a lot
No
of
doubt.
and the whole idea that our bodies are recreating, they're dying and being reborn, every minute. And so the cells die, they're reinvigorated. As we go through the cycle of life, we are a different person physically than we were even a half an hour ago. The environment that we're breathing, the air, causes changes in us. We can think about the biosphere, we can think about subtle energies. All of these things influence us. And I think that that's, part of what Deepak's talking about.
Yeah, awesome. I know that a big part of your work has been asking questions and conducting interviews on topics that have been considered taboo. What questions do you encourage people to consider in relation to death?
Who am I? Who am I? What am I capable of becoming? Is there something more than my physical being? If I lose someone, are they gone? Or is there a way in which we can continue our connection? So are people really lost to us when they die, or can we keep that connection going? And I think that that's a very healing idea, particularly when somebody we love so much is gone in that physical way. Are they really gone? Or is there a way in which we can maintain our communication? And I personally believe that we can.
Wonderful, thank you. Also in the film, there's the following statement about death. Death is the moment where everything is now. Explain.
Well, in these Buddhist practices, for example, where it is about being present in that moment, and at that point of death, it is that presence in whatever is coming next, or nothing. If you are involved in one of these mindfulness practices, where, it's all about being here now, then you can never be anywhere else but here now. It's a constant iteration of that nowness. And so I think death is just a part of that. But of course, people hold it in different ways, and I don't want to be dogmatic about it. I think, it's, as you said, I like to ask questions. I encourage people to ask their own questions, and, stimulating conversations. So if you are in a situation with a family member who's dying, it can be very hard to ask questions. So maybe don't wait, ask those questions earlier, begin to have conversations at the kitchen table, where instead of it being something scary, it's something that is enlivening.
Yeah, I like that word. That's a great choice, word choice there. And final question is,
go here in just a minute, but
yes, of course, yeah. Sure. And this is also Deepak, I think quoting Tagore. At the time death comes knocking at your door, what will you give to him? So I'd like to ask you, how do we rephrase this to modern day reality? So as not to scare people, but to encourage them to embark on a fulfilling life.
Well, asking those questions, engaging them in a way that isn't fearful. One of the things that the terror management theory suggests is that if you can bolster people's self-esteem, that they're less likely to have these aberrant behaviors. So as people confront their mortality, if they have a positive sense of self, they are less likely to become aggressive or combative. And
Yeah, I
so,
think that's really good.
and I think that, it's as true today as when Tagore was, writing, when death comes knocking, what will you offer? And that's a lovely, generous kind of way of thinking about the topic. And I'm not into thinking about death at all times, but I think it's a healthy meditation to
Sure,
contemplate.
absolutely.
And I'm a gardener, and so I know that when I groom my garden, when I prune the roses, that I have this azalea right now, and I thought it was gone, and and I cut it back, and I thought, well, next year I'll plant it in the ground, and it's just blooming like crazy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so that's an example, I think, of where, as we think about the garden as a wonderful, both literal and metaphorical way of understanding death and rebirth, I think it can make it, part of the beauty.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Marilyn. It's been an awesome interview. Where can people find you? I know you gave your email if anybody wants to participate in your study relating to the psychomantium.
Yeah. So,
Um,
like I said, MarilynSchlitz.com is my website, and there's a lot of resources there. Some of the podcasts on different topics. And I'm gearing up to do another series of podcasts and kind of playing with the idea of dialogues across generations. And so, not
Great
only,
idea.
yeah, I talked to a digital nomad yesterday, and she was just so fascinating. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have, the opportunity to hear from people across these different generations who are, considering different lifestyle choices. That's very
Yeah.
exciting. So
Yeah.
so
That,
stay tuned
yeah,
is
that's
what I
awesome.
would say. My website is a great place. People can sign up for my newsletter. And I have something called Stallion Springs Academy, where I have some online courses, self-paced. So Death Makes Life Possible is one of the courses that's available there. All of that can be accessed through my website.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marilyn.
Okay, thank
Wonderful.
you. Thank you for asking such great questions.